guys, so first of all, I've come up with an intro for my channel. So here it goes. My name's Lynette. I talk mainly about mental health. I talk about family violence. I talk about LGBT issues. Talk about issues that are happening in the world, and I talk about books, and I sometimes just do a few little fun videos to break it up a bit. So please hit the subscribe button and the little bell if that's something you're interested in. That's Casper. He's sitting next to me. He loves me most of the time. He's really angry at me today because I had to give him his worming tablet and he hates it. Anyway, let's get started for today. So today I wanted to talk about suicide. So when I was 17, my mum committed suicide. And I'm basically going to talk about her story. I might move the camera closer actually. I'm basically going to talk about her story and how I felt, and yeah, go from there. So my mum had a mental illness pretty much my entire life, and most of the time she was on her medication, but other times she wasn't. And when she wasn't on her medication, she would get really manic and she would get really depressed, and she'd go through like all these really extreme emotions, and she would also become quite paranoid. And I was living in a state that was away from all family, most friends, from the time I was 14 with her. And so I was basically looking after her, and a few months before she died, she did attempt suicide, and I found her unconscious in bed. So, you know, me being the typical teenager in school holidays, I slept in till like midday, and my mum always without fail was up by 7 a.m. We had 2 cats and 2 dogs, and they'd be fed and would be either outside or sitting with her, and she'd be walking around doing stuff or gardening or things like that. And so that morning I woke up, my mum's 2 dogs were outside the front of my bedroom door, and they were like yelping and all of that, and they wanted to go outside. So I let them outside, and I couldn't find my mum in the house, so I thought at first she'd gone out and she'd just let me sleep, but her car was in the driveway, and like her purse was still there and her keys were still there, because she was like really safety conscious. So even if I was in the house and she went out even for a walk, she would take her keys with her because she would lock the doors. So I thought that was really strange. So I knocked on her bedroom door and there was no answer, and I looked through the whole house. I went out the front, out the back, and could not find her. And then I let our 2 dogs in, and they were like whining at her door. So I decided to open her door, and she was in bed, and I had this feeling that something just wasn't right. So I went over to her to try and wake her up, and she really wasn't responsive. And then I saw next to her bed there was an empty bottle of tablets, and I had gone with her to the doctor the day before and then to the chemist, so I knew they were like a new pack of tablets and they were all gone. So I put two and two together and called an ambulance straight away. And so I went with her in the ambulance, and she was in hospital for 3 or 4 days. They chose not to keep her in a psych ward or anything like that. They let her home, and she was on like new medication. She was seeing a psychiatrist, and all of that was really good for a little while. And then a few months later, her and her boyfriend split up, and he wasn't the nicest guy. He was very controlling, and even after they'd split up, he was still sort of harassing my mum, and I was being 17, I didn't understand really much about that sort of, the family violence part and the controlling part. But then when I was 17, I moved in with my boyfriend, who became abusive. And one day in December, in 2006, we'd been out the whole day, and we were on the train home, and I just felt like I needed to go to my mum's house. I didn't understand why. I just felt this need that I needed to go to her house. And I told my boyfriend this, and he's like, oh, I'm really tired. Why don't we do it in the morning? We can go in the morning. And I agreed with him, even though I had this feeling. And mainly I agreed with him because he was violent and I didn't want to start a fight. And I'm not trying to make excuses or anything, but that sort of was my mindset at the time. And then my mum used to call me at 7:30 every night. Didn't matter what, she would call me at 7:30. She could have been sick as anything, she'd still call me. And that night the call didn't come, and I said to my boyfriend at the time, oh, my mum didn't call. And he's like, oh, she might have fallen asleep or something. And that made the unease even more. And then so the next morning I got up quite early. I had a lot of trouble sleeping last night. I just had this feeling that something was really, really wrong. And at that stage, I never knew police could do like welfare checks and things like that. So we waited till the next morning. We went over to her house, and she had the fly screen unlocked. She had the door open, and there was only a fly screen that was closed, and it was unlocked. And that was really weird for my mum. So we walked in, and like her two dogs were there, and they were like really stressed out, and they were yelping and whining, and my mum was sort of lying down on the couch in the lounge, and my mum never slept on the couch. Like, she always went to bed. She would have a tea in bed and read for a while before she sort of, went to sleep. And I thought that was weird. And then, so my boyfriend was out having a smoke at the time outside, and I walked up to her, and then I saw her eyes were open. I'd called her name, and then I touched her, and I knew instantly that she had passed away. And I just screamed. All I remember is screaming. And my boyfriend came in and he said, I'm going to call 000. He called 000, which is the emergency number in Australia. And he's like, the operator asked, police, fire, ambulance. And he's like, I don't know who we need. And the operator asked, like, what was going on. So they sent both police and an ambulance out. And I just remember my boyfriend moved me from the living room to the kitchen and had made me a coffee. And I remember the paramedic just coming in and saying, your mum died, right? And I know he had a job to do, and I know he probably didn't mean it. I think he could have probably said it in a better way, but it is what it is. So after that, because of the way I was feeling, for a long time I blamed myself because I knew she had mental health problems. I'd moved out. I had felt all night there was something wrong. Eventually we found out that it was suicide, and that's basically my mum's story. And it took a lot of talking to like psychologists about it, and then pointing out, I was 17. I didn't have, one, the training, or two, the life skills to deal with that sort of situation, to know the signs. I remember the last time I had actually saw her, we went to this like Christmas parade, and she seemed really happy. And but thinking back now, they say hindsight's a gift. She was overly happy to the point where now I'm like, yeah, she was definitely hiding something. She had just her behaviour, even when she wasn't on her meds, were never like what they were in sort of the weeks leading up to her suicide. Like, she asked, my boyfriend used to do those home job tattoos, and she'd asked him for a tattoo, and she was drinking a lot, and I was worried about it, but I didn't know what to do. And it took me a long time to sort of come to terms with it, realize it wasn't really my fault. And I was told by a psychologist once, well, unless they're getting professional help, there's not much people can really do. Especially at 17. So I just really wanted to share that story because I know suicide's not talked about a lot. And I just hope this helps someone. So, yeah, I hope that you comment and subscribe, and thank you to all my new subscribers. It's been really good getting your views on mental health as well. So yeah, I will see you next time.